Hello, everyone. I'm hoping that more people will join soon. Welcome to the May Business Applications NYC Meetup event. Today we have joining us members of two meetup groups, the NYC Business Applications and the NYC Power Platform Meetup Group, which we recently joined. I'd like to thank Linn for volunteering to give us a session on debugging cloud flows using the Dataverse Connector, as well as the event organizers, Mihir Shah, Aaron Fishman, Arun Vinoth, and myself, Eric Levin. In addition to the local users, we will have, I know some of them registered, some Microsoft MVPs and members of the worldwide community. I just saw someone from Germany join, which is one of the benefits of being able to do this remotely. So during the presentation, try to keep yourself muted. And if you have questions, you can put it in the chat window or raise your hand in Teams, and we'll try to get to you once there's a break or at the end of the session. So before we start, let's give a warm welcome to Linn. Linn is a Microsoft Business Applications MVP. He is currently working as a technical architect in Wellington, New Zealand. And Linn started his journey as a developer in Microsoft Dynamics CRM4. That's a long time ago. And his current focus is Dynamics 365 and Power Automate Cloud Flows. I guess, Linn, I'm going to add some personal stuff. Linn loves traveling, and when he's at home, he spends most of his leisure time playing solo games and watching anime. I can tell you I'm definitely jealous. So, Linn, anytime you want to go ahead and start, you can take control of the screen. I think I made you a presenter.
Okay, sure. I will share my screen. Okay, today's session is about the debugging and troubleshooting cloud flows. That is solely based on my experience over the last 2 years building cloud flows, and a lot of times I had to encounter issues and I didn't know how to solve it, just to try to get around things and spend time. But over the time, I'm getting better at it, and hopefully I can share this experience with you all, and you all don't have to spend that time to do these debugging and troubleshooting when you have a problem with the cloud flows. And as Eric mentions, I'm Microsoft Business Application MVP. I'm currently working as a technical architect in Wellington, New Zealand, and Dynamics 365 is my main focus, but I do Power Automate and our Power Apps. When I'm not working, I'm blogging and participating in the forums, answering questions, or like speaking at the user groups and the conference, like user groups like today. And I play games, and it's mostly solo games, and watch anime. So if you have the similar interests, you can reach out to me, like we can talk and share our favorite ones. And you can follow me on my Twitter. It's just my full name, and my blog is my full name, linnzawwin.blogspot.com. Okay, enough about this, and let's start the session. And the first thing is using Compose as a logging mechanism. So if like we all writing and making flows and cloud flows, we're sort of like, some of those are functional consultants, some are technical consultant or developers, but we all consider this as a citizen developer platform, and we got to think as like a developer. And one thing we do is logging the steps, logging the outcomes in each step, so that if there's anything come up, we can see it in the log to figure out what's went wrong. So Compose step is the best action to use as the logging. And for example, in this instance, we have this of actions, and if you want to, based on this outcome, we are just branching and this going to this condition, yes condition, and no condition. And if you go to look at the flow run history for this particular flow, you will see which one goes to yes and which one goes to no, but you will not know which particular condition it is true become true and which particular condition becomes false. So in that case, if you want to log and visualize what went wrong, you can use this compose as write it out all these the same values and you use in the condition in the compose step, and you can see the values in the flow run history, and then you can figure out what went wrong. So this the compose step is really useful to log and use it everywhere to see the data, even the output of the um, all these actions. So this show raw outputs is the ones that I think it was added last year. I will show you in the. So let's say we have this list all accounts, and for these outputs, we can see there's a link to click to download. And we can, when we click on it, we will see the list of our JSON, for example. Probably I just open up this window for so long, so I just can see, but normally it just open up the JSON value of this output. But for, let's say if there's a data is really only like one record, and what's the flow run should show is the status reason 200, and I can figure out what's the actual output, and that says Microsoft just added the show raw outputs, and where you can see the list of or sometimes it even shows that JSON on this right hand side to visualize the output of this particular step. So previously we didn't have that show raw output functionality, so we had to use the compose action to write that value out into that compose step. So that is how you see if you're getting that status reason 200 error. So at the end of the session, I will share my slides with the organizers, and so they can upload it into the meetup group. And in each slide, there's an accompanying link for my blog post where you can see more details about that information. Another thing is skip flow runs during testing. So most of the time, when we develop the flows, sometimes the flow is like really long, and we only want to test the initial part. Or sometimes there's we just have a flow that lists records, and we just delete the records at the end. So we just want to see what is the output of the list records, but we don't want to delete it yet. We just want to test the initial part, and we want to skip the rest of the part. So the first thing that you can do is the terminate action. So with terminate action, what you can do is, so we have this list all records action, and then we have this long running process that have like dozens of steps in between, and you don't want to run that while you are testing and for just within the flow manually. And in that case, what you can do is you can add the terminate step and make it succeeds, and it will just only run until this part, and you can see the output of these steps without running this long running process. So that is one way of skipping flow steps. And another one is the configure run after. So configure run after is you skip the step that you don't want to run, by making it like changing it to the normally by default it is only run when the previous step is successful. You change it to something else like has failed or is skip, and then the step after to make it like it should run when it is skipped. So I will show you how it works like. So in this one, I want to run this list do list actions, and I want to skip this step, and I want to run this compose. So in this case, I can't put a terminate up there because if I put it there, this compose will not run. And if you want to just put it skip only this bit, you can configure to run to change to this to skip. And this one, you can also change the configure run after to is skipped. So in that way, what happened is when this is successful, it will check this. And in this step, this previous step was not skipped, so this step was not processed. And then it goes to here, and here it check, okay, long running process, it is skipped, so it just processed this compose count step. So this is how you can skip the step in the middle of the flow. Another thing similar to terminate step is the condition control, where you can add the condition step and you put all the steps that you don't want to run in within this step. So let's say we have this steps that you want, long running process that I don't want to run. So I put a condition step, and let's say 1 is equal to 1. So we know that it will definitely go to the yes route. And we just put at the steps that we don't want to run into these steps, so that it will never go to the no route, and it will just go to the yes route, and it will proceed with the steps below. So this is one way of like in develop terms, we call it making a comment. We put a code comment, and so that the compiler wouldn't run this piece of code. So in the same way, the flow, when the flow runs, it will not run this no route, and it will just go to yes and then the steps afterwards. So that's one way of making skipping the steps using condition. Another one is copy to my clipboard. So let's say, for example, I have this step. Okay, after listing all actions, I apply to each, and I delete the rows for everyone, all the records, and I'll just process the rest. But I don't want to run it yet, and I just copy to my clipboard and just delete it. And I just run it and see the records and see the outcome and everything. And after that, when I'm happy, when I'm finalized, and when I want to re-edit back, I just go to my clipboard and just re-edit from the clipboard. So that's you just temporarily remove, but you can easily edit back. So if you want to add multiple steps, if you want to add like 10 steps, you just create a scope and add all these into the scope, and you just copy the scope, the whole scope, and you can just delete it. So that's a good thing about copy to the clipboard, but make sure that you are not like you don't close this window. Like if you just refresh or close, and when you come back and you'll see my clipboard is empty. Or unless what you can do is you can just copy the whatever you copied in the clipboard to somewhere in the notepad or anything. And if it is clear, what you can do is in this space, you can press Ctrl V, and it will try to paste the actual text in your clipboard as one of this step. So it will just add the text value of the clipboard into as one of the steps that you can choose. So yeah, this is all about this copy to my clipboard session way. And the last one is the static result. So how static result works is in your every actions of the flow steps, I just want to, let's say I just want to skip this step. I can, there's still a preview feature, but you can still use it for your debugging purpose. You can enable the static value. So what it means is when the actual flow runs, you can try to simulate and make sure you either fail or you succeeded, and you even can specify what are the values that you actually return from this particular action without actually processing. So if you're not using any value from this step, you can simply call succeed and status code OK, and it will just show as succeeded, and then it will go to the next step. But if you want to just fake some data out of this step, you can still enter into the headers and the values for each header key value items. So, and you can see at this action has static result configured, so you can easily identify that you have done the static result for this particular action. Yep, so those are the various ways of skipping or commenting, disabling the flow step actions when you're doing designing and testing the flows. And another topic that I want to go through is finding a flow run. So that is more related to the troubleshooting, and let's say we have 10 records created, and out of 10, one record has a problem. And we have this GUID of this particular one, and this particular flow doesn't process properly, and then we want to trigger it. We want to figure out what went wrong. Normally, we can go to that the flow run history, and we can go to there and we can look for which record has related to this particular record. So normally we can just check with the timestamp. It is easier, but let's imagine if we have 12, or if it is a bulk schedule job and maybe like 20, 30 records being triggered at the same time, and it is a little bit hard to check each and everything manually. So for example, this trigger particular flow, it runs on create of the contact, and there are 3 flows run at 12:46 a.m. and in my contact, there are 3 contacts which are running at created at the 12:46 a.m. So I am not sure. I don't know which one is which one. So I just want to find out. For example, this is the problematic one, and I want to figure out the particular flow run for this one. Okay, so get the flow record ID, or you can also get the record ID from the URL too. So normally we would think this is just created from like 3654. So what we want to find is this one and the middle one, and we think that this might be the actual flow run for this particular context 5. But as you know, all these flows are asynchronous, and you don't really know in which order they will run. It's just run depending on how the resource allocations and the system works. And now that we have this GUID, we make sure that this particular contact trigger is for this one, and we can put a cursor into the body of the output and press Ctrl F to show this fine. And we search with that as a no results. So that means this particular run is not for the one that we're looking for. And then the next one, and we just go to this and do it again. Okay, voila. So this is the flow run that we're looking for, and then we can continue and troubleshoot what went wrong. Well, this is a way of managing it manually, but it can be really hard if there are dozens of or hundreds of records. So another way is exporting a flow run history. So if we go to that flow run history, now we have go and click on all runs, get CSV file, it will generate and it will give us a link to download the CSV file. So once we downloaded the file, we can just freeze the first top row, which contains all this header, and we try to find this GUID in this flow run history. Okay, so we found this one, and this is in the trigger output of this particular row. And if we get to this run link in this column, you can get the URL of the run link. And if I put that and open it, you can get the flow run history of this particular records without you having to go through one by one and finding in the trigger output body. So that is one way of getting the history, getting the flow run by exporting in the flow run history. And another one is we can build our own. This is a little bit more tricky. It may be more techy. It may more be relevant to some people who are interested in like creating more like a custom connector. So this flow this is a flow which used to find the flow run by providing the name of the flow that you're running and the GUID of the records that you want to find. And by using that, it's used this custom connector to get all the flow runs and find the flow run in each flow run history and find the matching one. And then it returns you the URL and all this information of the flow run. Okay, let's find out how we're doing that. So in order to start that, so the first thing this is the solution that I have everything. By the way, this solution was totally inspired by Stefan's blog post about how to get the custom connector to get flow run history. So in the link that I mentioned in this slide, this is my blog post where I have a link to his Stefan's blog post, as well as how to configure that kind of flow. So if you look into that, the first thing that you have to do is create the custom connector. And to create the custom connector, there are all these values are provided in the blog post. And even before you create a custom connector, you need to create the application user. So this is how in the Azure AD, Microsoft Azure, you have to go and register your app registration, and that is where you will get the application client ID, and you create a client secret. And in the API permission, you will have to give the run for the flow service for the activity read all and the flows read all. So these are the two. And also this user is just a default one. And after that, once you save that, it will ask you to grant a permission, and you just click on grant admin consent. And then you can use that client ID and client secret in this your custom connector. After that, the resource resource URL is mentioned in his blog post, the serviceflow.microsoft.com. So you can fill up that, and you just provide the other definitions. Everything is in his blog, and you can test. And the parameter is the environment name and the flow name. So don't be confused by the terminology, that environment name and the flow name. So the environment name is actually the GUID of this environment. So I have the Linn Zaw Win's environment. So that is the GUID of this environment. And the flow name is also exactly the GUID of this flow. So we have the environment solutions and flows, and so this GUID of the flow is the flow name that particular custom connector is expecting. Okay, now let's get and check how the actual flow is being built. So I just enter trigger manual trigger, and I just the input parameter just the name of the flow and the GUID of the row. And what it does is, first thing, it just get the GUID of the flow, because I just don't want to ask the user to enter the GUID. So as long as they know the name of the flow, like debugging and troubleshooting cloud flows, contact create, so they can enter over here. So by using that, I'm going to go and find the GUID of the flow. So in this parameter, I populate the GUID of the flow. This environment name is if it is the different environment, you have to provide a different environment GUID. But since I'm running my flow in the same environment, I just took it from the same current workflow variable values. So once I get it, I burst the output of this custom connector and into the JSON. So for first time, I just run it for first time, and I generated from the sample, and I got this following schema. And this is a tricky part, because the value returned from this custom connector doesn't have enough data to identify for which record this particular flow run is for. So I want to find that the test contact 5, and I have this GUID, but the value returning from this custom connector doesn't contain the value for this GUID. But what it does is it does have the URL to retrieve the trigger, this particular flow run information. So by using that, I have to call the HTTP request. And once you get the HTTP request, you can use this internal ID of the trigger and make it compare. So this is running for each flow. Let's say I have 50 flow runs in last 28 days. this action will go through all the flow runs and get the flow run details for all flow runs and find the internal item ID of the body. So that is what it looks like in the actual flow. So if you go to the body, if I search with the GUID of this particular record, so there's a contact ID, but there's one more internal item, internal ID. So that property is same item internal ID, even though if you're running for account, the other property may be account ID. If you're running for email, the other property will be email ID. But this item internal ID is always the same property name, so we can use it to identify for all the table types. So once it is matching, so if it is no, it'll just skip. If it is matching, I will just add that as a flow run history variable. So the flow run history variable is an array variable because even for the same row, same data, it can the flow may be triggered multiple times. So I'm just keep adding. And it's just physically contain the run ID, run URL, start time, end time, and status, and then it just composes it out. Okay, so let's try and run this flow manually. Okay, record GUID, the one that I just copied in my clipboard, the GUID of the contact 5. This flow name is this name of this flow. Okay, and then run it. In actual production environment, it may take a long time because it will have more than six results for sure. If you have 100 rows, it will have to apply to each and run it, so it will take a lot of time. But at least we have something to do it without going through manually. And let's see, in the output step, you have the array JSON and have run ID, run URL, and start time, end time, and status. It was fill. So if you have 3 flow runs and one is succeeded and one is fill, you can know which one you want to open. And if I copy and open it, yeah, so you got this flow run. So this is how you can just find the flow run by running the on-demand flow if you have a lot of flow run in the history and you don't want to go through the whole process, the manual steps that I mentioned over here, or exporting the history. But sometimes I really miss how we used to have this convenience of back in the workflows, we have this associated view, the background process view, where we can see all the background processes which were not deleted or filled are still attached to that contact, and I can just simply click on those. And yeah, I don't know, I wish sometimes Flow, they could also make something like this, and it will make our life a lot easier by going through those custom connectors and checking the flows. So one thing we can do is we can build our own logging flow run history. So it can see something like this. So you have this record, and in the flow run history, you have like different flows running, and what is the trigger, what was status, when start, and you can just, there's a flow run URL, and I can just click, simply click on this. So now that we have this flow run history, even after 28 days, we still have the history, even though clicking on the link may not work anymore. because the flow run history only contains data for the 28 days, and after they will be purged. Let's imagine this desk contact 5, the flow run history would look something like this. And if we go and check the details and what's recording and what is the flow name and all this information, yeah, if we can have something like this, it was really great. But unfortunately, we don't have out of the box, and we have to build it. And since we have to build it, it comes with a lot of effort. I would say I just did it as a proof of concept, but I haven't used in my actual project yet. Partially because it's an overhead that I have to go through is pretty big. Even though I can copy and paste the steps, and imagine like you have to do it for each and every flow. So I have this flow. Let's imagine this is the main logic where all these create, update, delete, and whatever the flow is supposed to do. So we put everything in the scope, and at the end of the scope, we just have this branching. Like we have configure run after this step. If it is run, it's go to successful. If it is fail, this will set this variable as fail. If it is timeout, this will set this variable as the timeout. So once we're done, this step is just to get the error message of the flow, because sometimes the error message in the multiple places, especially like when you are in the scope, when you're in the container, the error message is there in the scope step as well as the actual like step within the small step. Let's say I have this error in this step. So the error message is also in this step as well as the main scope step. So I have to clear all these noises, and only if it's no entered into the error message variable. And this is such also a really big expression. But yeah, if you're interested, you can find out in my blog post in this link below. Once you get the error message, just another step is just to set the trigger event, whether it's a create, update, or delete. So there's a trigger contains a one property called SDK message that can have this create, update, delete property. And ultimately it creates a flow run. So flow run, I created as a custom activity so that it can be recording to any table type, and just populate the flow name, description, if there's any error, and duration, and start time, end time, and the flow run URL, the URL of the flow run, just like how we got it for the other flow. And if it is run as the different user ID, if it does contain data, it just set the triggering user by setting the owner as this particular system user ID. And if the trigger is not delete event, if the data is delete event, we cannot set the recording anymore because the data has been deleted. But otherwise, we can set the recording for this one. But for this step, it is the triggering for the account, the trigger for this account table. So I just hard code it in the account regarding. If it is for contact, just like this, you have to set it for contact. And the terminate with the same status. So what this status is do is, so if in the step above here over here, So you see, if there's a successful, it goes to successful, and it's fail and timeout, it catch in this way. So if we just terminate just like this, all of the flows will be successful, shown as successful, because this error is being handled by these two steps. So by adding this step, what I'm doing is I am trying to terminate this flow as succeeded if was successful in the step above. Otherwise, is trying to terminate it as a fail. So that we can just go and see in the flow run history easily and identify which one was successful and which one was actually failed. Yeah, that's took a lot of time to log just for that. So it's a simpler version. Okay, so this simpler version, what it does is it when you only need to add two steps. One is I extract all the steps, logging paths, everything in the child run flow. And if it is set regarding, if it is existing data, it just set the regarding row into the flow run. And the rest is the main logic. So this run, these two steps are actually running at the beginning of the step before the actual happen. Because once it's actual happen, this one is fill and it may time out and I need to handle everything to the rest of the logics at the in between of the flow, which will take almost take as the same effort as this bigger flow that I have to do. So um, in this flow, I just pass through the current workflow, the whole data, temp into it, and the trigger, and trigger values from like who with the system user ID and the what is the trigger name and the table name, everything. So in the child run flow, it will pass the JSON of this workflow and trigger JSON. And it's pretty much similar to the other flow. If it is a create, update, delete, it just set the variable based on the SDK message in the trigger. After that, it creates a flow run. So, but the only difference is since we're creating this flow run at the beginning of the flow, not at towards the end. So we don't have the end time, we don't have the duration, we don't have the status, whether it's a successful or fail. But other than that, you have pretty much everything like start time and the flow run URL. Oh, we also don't have the description, the error message, because if it's not filled yet. And if it is the run as a system user ID contains data, it's assign the owner of this flow to this particular user, and it responded back to the main parent flow. And main parent flow, what it does is it just set the regarding, because regarding can be different table types. So I just don't want to put it in the child workflow logic. So if it is a contact, you have to put it in the contact regarding context. So in this field. So, but at least this adding two steps into all the flows is way better than like adding big chunk of piece and getting the status error message, and the end time is actually not worth the effort to do everything. So that is more about basically running the flow run history by the child flow. So if you have any questions about anything, just feel free to unmute yourself and you can ask to me. And I also check through the chat message if we have any other question in the chat. Okay. Any questions from any other participants?
Anyone else? Mihir, Arun?
No, just wanted to say this was very informative. Thank you, Linn. Appreciate it.
Okay. Thank you. Thanks for.
Okay,
Yes,
so
he's a good.
yeah, sorry.
Yes, yes,
Okay, so just before we drop off, just a couple of announcements. Let me share again. Okay, so just anybody who is interested, next week there is Microsoft Build for all of those developers out there. It's 3-day event, a lot of great content. So since it's a virtual event, there's definitely still space available. We are little by little, as the Microsoft Power Platform user groups become available, we're going to shift our groups into there. But right now, probably at least until the end of the year, we'll have the groups both in Meetup and in the Power Platform user group. We'll just post the events and the links to the events in both places. And then our next event is June 16th, same time, Wednesday. And we are currently working with the speaker and the content to verify what the next subject is. We are actually interested in learning what people in the user groups are interested as far as content. If there's anything in particular that you would like us to present, we have access to both Microsoft and MVPs like Linn and other people who are willing to give us presentations. So you can send us a message. You can put it in one of the two meetup groups, or basically in the new Microsoft user groups, and we will try to accommodate any future requests. So thanks everyone for attending. Thank you, Linn, for a great presentation. We will be posting this video within the next few days in our YouTube channel, and we'll send the link over to everybody so that can take a look. And also, Linn promised he will be sending us the slide deck, so we'll be posting that as well.
Yeah, definitely doing it straight away.
Yeah, that will help us a lot. Thank you.
Okay, so thank you, everybody. Thanks, Linn, again.
Okay, thank you all for attending, and thank you the organizers for inviting me over. Bye.
Yeah, bye. Thanks, Linn. Bye.